"Sir, why is there an extra guest in your wedding video?" Grace Miller whispered. The 8-year-old pointed at the frozen screen, her small face solemn beneath the projector's blue light. Vittorio De Luca stopped with his wineglass halfway to his mouth. Behind the bride stood a man no one had invited, one hand flashing a silver falcon ring beside a wall clock reading 6:07. Isabella touched her pearl necklace. "He was probably staff," she said smoothly. Grace raised her old silver camera. Then why was he already behind the locked door? 3 hours earlier, the De Luca mansion still carried the careful shine of a house recovering from a wedding. White roses had begun to brown at their edges. Champagne glasses stood in exact rows on silver trays. Every folded napkin faced the same direction except one near the service hallway, where the fabric had been turned inward as though someone had opened it and hastily pressed it flat again. Grace noticed because her mother had taught her that good service meant seeing what other people left behind. Elena Miller moved quietly between the kitchen and the private screening room, collecting empty cups before the family arrived. Her employee badge, cracked across one corner, swung from a blue cord against her black uniform. Grace sat on a low bench with her scratched silver camera resting in both hands. Elena had bought it used for $12 at a neighborhood thrift store. The battery cover only stayed shut with a strip of clear tape, but Grace loved how the camera made small things hold still long enough to understand. "Stay where I can see you," Elena said, smoothing a crease from Grace's sleeve. "And don't take pictures of guests unless they say it's okay." Grace nodded. She had already taken pictures of harmless things. The leaning wedding cake topper, a row of polished shoes beneath the coat rack, sunlight caught in a serving spoon. Then the service door clicked. Margaret Vale entered wearing a cream suit and white gloves, though the wedding had ended hours ago. Her smile arrived before her eyes did. "Elena," she said pleasantly, "the family wants the room perfect. No interruptions tonight." Elena glanced toward Grace. "She'll be quiet." "Of course." Margaret's gaze rested on the old camera. "Children do have a talent for noticing things that aren't important." She crossed the room and adjusted a white ribbon tied around a floral stand. One glove had a loose thread at the thumb. Grace watched it catch briefly on the ribbon before Margaret pulled free. A small metal charm swung from the ribbon's end, shaped like a bird with spread wings. Margaret tucked it behind the flowers. A moment later, Adrian Cole entered carrying 2 camera bags. He wore the relaxed expression of a man who had spent years making nervous people trust him. He placed one memory card beside the projector, then slipped his hand into the inner pocket of the larger bag as if checking for something. Grace saw a flash of red tape before the zipper closed. "Is that the wedding movie?" she asked. Adrian looked down at her. "The finished version." His smile never changed. "The only version anyone needs." Vittorio entered last. Conversation stopped before he reached the center of the room. At 44, he did not need to raise his voice to control a space. People arranged themselves around his silence. His charcoal suit was unbuttoned, and the silver watch that had belonged to his father caught the light as he took his seat beside Isabella. She wore pearls at her throat and placed one hand over his with practiced tenderness. Grace noticed Vittorio did not close his fingers around hers. The film began with music, laughter, and sunlight pouring through stained glass. Elena remained near the back wall, not seated with the guests, holding an empty tray against her waist. Grace stood beside her, watching the screen more carefully than the people on it. 12 seconds before Isabella entered the chapel, a man appeared in the family corridor behind the flowers. He was there for less than a second. No one reacted. Grace looked down at her camera, searching through the pictures she had taken that afternoon. She found the same shoulder, the same dark sleeve, and the same silver bird on his hand. Then she looked back at the screen and saw the wall clock behind him. 6:07. The guest doors had not opened until 6:20. Grace stepped away from her mother and pointed. Margaret moved immediately, one gloved hand reaching toward the projector remote. Vittorio saw the movement before she touched it. "Leave it," he said. The room went still. Grace lifted her camera, zoomed into the photograph, and felt her stomach tighten. Hanging beneath the stranger's hand was a black security badge with a cracked corner. The name printed across it was Elena Miller. Elena's name looked too large on the tiny black badge, as if the letters themselves had been forced into the photograph. Grace held the camera with both hands while the room seemed to narrow around her. Her mother's cracked employee card still hung from the blue cord against her uniform, close enough for everyone to see. Vittorio looked from the badge in the photograph to the one on Elena's chest. Same name, same black border, same fracture running through the lower right corner. Margaret recovered first. "That proves nothing," she said, her voice calm enough to sound reasonable. "Staff badges are often photographed during setup. A reflection, perhaps. Or the child captured Elena's card on a nearby cart." Elena lowered the empty tray. "My badge never left me." Isabella's expression softened with public concern. "Elena, no one is accusing you." The words were gentle, but they placed the accusation in the center of the room where everyone could see it. "We simply need to understand why your credentials appear beside an unauthorized man." Grace turned toward her mother. Elena's fingers had closed around the edge of the tray so tightly that one knuckle had gone white. "She was in the kitchen," Grace said. Margaret gave her a patient smile. "You cannot know where your mother was every minute, sweetheart." Grace swallowed. The projector fan whispered above them. For one brief second, all she wanted was to step back beside Elena and let the adults make the picture mean something else. Instead, she pressed the button that displayed the photograph's information. The time appeared in small green numbers. 6:11 p.m., Mom signed for the hot trays at 6:10, she said. "I was waiting for her by the warming ovens." Adrian folded his arms. Old cameras. Drift. Sometimes by hours. Vittorio did not answer him. He held out one hand. Grace crossed the carpet and placed the silver camera in his palm. It looked almost weightless against his fingers. He examined the image without changing expression, then saved a copy to his phone. "Elena," he said, "where were you at 6:11? "Main kitchen, sir." "Who saw you?" "The sous chef, 2 servers, the pastry team." Margaret tilted her head. Memory becomes unreliable when people feel threatened. Vittorio's eyes moved to her. "Then we won't use memory." He turned to the head of security near the door. "Check the kitchen footage." Quietly, the man left without a word. No one else moved. Isabella reached for Vittorio's wrist, touching the silver watch that had belonged to his father. "This is becoming cruel," she murmured. The child saw a confusing image. "Elena is frightened. We can handle it tomorrow." Vittorio glanced at her hand until she removed it. "Someone entered a restricted corridor wearing my employee's identity. Tomorrow is late." A server entered carrying coffee, unaware of the tension. The cups rattled softly against their saucers. Grace recognized the young woman from the kitchen and watched her set one cup beside Isabella, one beside Margaret, and none beside Elena. It was an ordinary omission, practiced so often no one seemed to notice. Elena thanked her anyway. Grace reached for a sugar packet and slid it toward her mother, though Elena had no coffee to put it in. The small gesture made Elena's mouth tighten. Then Adrian laughed once, quietly. "We are building a conspiracy around a blurry photograph and a child's recollection." Grace looked at him. "You were there too." His smile held, but only just. She enlarged the left edge of the photograph. In the glass panel behind Luca, Adrian's reflection appeared with one arm extended. His watch face was visible beneath his cuff. Vittorio leaned closer. "What time does that say?" Adrian answered without looking. "Impossible to tell." Grace rotated the image. The hands became clear. 11 minutes past 6. The same time as the camera. The same time as the wall clock behind Luca. Adrian's jaw shifted once. "I move constantly during an event. That is my job." "You told us you never left the chapel after 6:10, Vittorio said. The photographer's eyes flicked toward Margaret, then back. "I may have stepped out briefly." "To receive what?" Vittorio asked. Grace zoomed farther. Between Luca and Adrian was a cream-colored envelope, caught halfway from one hand to the other. Margaret sighed as though disappointed by everyone's lack of sophistication. Vendors exchange payment envelopes all the time. This is exactly why children should not be involved in adult proceedings. Elena finally set the tray down. She is involved because she saw what your people missed. The room changed. Not loudly. Margaret's smile remained, but her eyes lost their warmth. Be careful, Elena. Defensiveness can look very much like guilt. Grace moved closer to her mother until their sleeves touched. Vittorio watched the distance close between them. When the security chief returned, he carried a tablet. Kitchen footage confirms Elena Miller at 6:10, 6:11, and 6:12. She never left the room. Vittorio's gaze settled on the cracked badge in Luca's hand. Then hers was copied. Margaret began to answer, but Grace noticed something at the bottom of the photograph. A white ribbon hung from Luca's wrist, and beneath it was a second black card, partly hidden. She magnified it until one line of text sharpened into view. It was not Elena's name. It was a door designation reserved for the DeLuca family corridor, and printed beneath it were the words, Master Access. Master Access remained on the screen long enough for the room to understand what it meant. The card in Luca's hand had not merely opened a service door. It could unlock the private corridor, the family offices, and the rooms where no guest was ever supposed to stand alone. Vittorio held Grace's camera without moving. His thumb rested beside the cracked battery cover, careful not to touch the screen. How many master cards exist? He asked. The security chief looked at Margaret before answering. 6 active cards, sir. 1 assigned to me, 2 to senior security, 1 to Mrs. Moretti for wedding access, 1 to Ms. Vale, 1 spare sealed in the office safe. Margaret's face remained composed, but her right hand closed over her left wrist, covering the edge of her white glove. Then the card in the photograph may be the spare, she said. Temporary access was issued throughout the day. Weddings require flexibility. Temporary access is logged, Vittorio replied. Of course. Her smile returned half a second too late. Then the log will settle this. The security chief opened the access records on his tablet. A column of times appeared in pale blue rows. Elena Miller's badge had opened the family corridor at 6:09. A MasterCard had opened the same door at 6:10. At 6:11, both cards appeared inside the restricted zone. Elena stared at the screen as if her own name had become a stranger. I was carrying soup trays, she said quietly. I never touched that hallway. The kitchen camera proves it, Vittorio said. He did not comfort her. He did something more useful. He kept the record open. Adrian shifted his weight. Access systems duplicate entries. It happens when doors close slowly. The security chief shook his head. Not across 2 credentials. Grace looked back at the photograph. The cream envelope between Luca and Adrian covered part of Adrian's hand, but his watch remained visible in the glass. 11 minutes past 6. She remembered the warming oven chiming at the same moment because Elena had told her not to open it. The timer had flashed 6:11 in bright red numbers. The oven clock said 11:02, Grace said. Adrian exhaled through his nose. You cannot possibly remember every clock in a building. I remember because Mom burned her finger. Elena looked at her. A faint pink mark still crossed the side of her thumb. The pan slipped when the timer sounded, Grace continued. She wrapped it in a towel. The towel had blue stripes. One of the kitchen servers near the door nodded before realizing everyone was looking at him. That's true. I got her ice. Vittorio's gaze moved to Adrian's reflection again. You said you never left the chapel after 6:10. Adrian adjusted his cuff over the watch. I said I did not remember leaving. No, Grace said. Her voice was small, but it carried because the room had gone silent. You said you never left. Isabella turned toward her with a patient expression polished for witnesses. Grace. Adults sometimes use words differently when they are under pressure. Grace tightened her fingers around the strap of her blue bracelet. He used the same words twice. Isabella touched her pearl necklace. That does not make him guilty. No, Vittorio said. It makes his story unstable. He handed the camera to the security chief. Preserve the original file. No edits. No transfers except through counsel. Adrian's eyes flicked toward the camera bag on the floor. It was the first time he had looked frightened. Margaret noticed and stepped between him and the table with the smoothness of someone rearranging furniture. Before this becomes unnecessarily damaging, she said, perhaps we should verify whether the image itself has been altered. Children press filters. Files corrupt. Light creates artifacts. Grace shook her head. There's another picture. She took the camera back when Vittorio nodded. Her thumb moved through the thumbnails until she found one she had nearly deleted. Elena in the kitchen doorway, holding a tray while the stainless steel warming oven glowed behind her. The clock read 6:11. In the curved reflection of the oven door, Adrian stood in the service hall with Luca, the cream envelope now tucked beneath his jacket. Between them, Margaret's white-gloved hand was pulling Elena's copied badge through a handheld scanner. Margaret's smile disappeared, only for a second, but Vittorio saw it. And beneath the scanner, clearly visible in the reflection, was a printed label bearing the serial number of the master access card sealed in the office safe. Vittorio looked at the serial number in the reflection, then at the security chief. Open the safe. No one moved for half a second. The pause was small, almost polite, but in a room built around obedience, it felt like a door refusing to unlock. Margaret recovered first. The office safe is part of the event security chain, she said. Opening it now, in front of staff and a child, could compromise procedures. Grace stood beside Elena near the back wall, her silver camera pressed against her chest. Around her, dark suits formed a quiet border. She was 8 years old, 5 feet from the screen, and somehow farther from authority than anyone else in the room. Isabella rose from her seat. Vittorio, perhaps counsel should review this privately. Grace has already been exposed to enough confusion. Her tone carried concern, not cruelty, which made the dismissal sharper. She should not be made responsible for accusations she cannot understand. Elena's chin lifted. She understands what she saw. Margaret turned to her with a measured smile. And you are naturally protective of your daughter. That does not make her interpretation reliable. Grace did not look at Margaret. She looked at the photograph. The scanner in the reflection had a small green light near its handle. Beneath it, the printed serial number ended in 419. She repeated the last 3 digits silently so she would not lose them. Vittorio noticed her lips move. What are you memorizing? He asked. 419. Why? Because if the safe card is different, then the picture is wrong. Her fingers tightened around the camera strap. And if it's the same, someone opened the safe. The room quieted. Vittorio turned to the security chief. Open it. This time the man obeyed. 2 guards left for the office while Margaret remained near the screen, one white-gloved hand resting lightly on the back of a chair. Adrian tried to make his voice casual. Even if the numbers match, equipment labels can be copied. Rental companies reuse inventory tags. Vittorio glanced at him. Then you should hope they do. 10 minutes passed. A server removed the untouched coffee. Grace watched Elena fold the loose sugar packet once. Then again, making the paper smaller without tearing it. It was the kind of thing her mother did when she was trying not to show fear. Isabella crossed the room and lowered her voice. Elena, this does not need to become a public spectacle. Take Grace home. Your position will be protected while we review everything. Elena looked at Vittorio, then back at Isabella. Protected from what? Isabella's pearl necklace shifted as her fingers found it. From misunderstanding. Whose? Grace asked. Isabella's hand stopped. For a moment, the warmth left her face. This is exactly what I mean, she said softly. A child repeats adult words without understanding their weight. Grace held the camera tighter. I understand my mom was in the kitchen, and her card was not. Vittorio did not look away from Isabella. Neither do I. The guards returned carrying a black evidence pouch and a printed access sheet. The security chief placed both on the table. Inside the pouch was the MasterCard from the office safe, sealed in clear plastic. Its serial number ended in 419. A low breath moved through the room. Margaret leaned closer but did not touch it. Then the safe seal must have been compromised before today. The seal is intact, the security chief said. Logged, signed, and photographed every morning. Margaret's expression barely changed, which suggests a duplicate label, not a stolen card. It was a reasonable answer. Clean, technical. Adrian seized it quickly. Exactly. Someone photographed the card during setup and printed the serial number onto another device. Vittorio said nothing. He took the guest list from Margaret's folder and laid it beside the sealed card. Bring me the original seating chart. Margaret hesitated. This is the original. Grace looked at the printed page. Table 14 showed 9 names. She remembered folding napkins at that table before the ceremony, counting each place because one chair had been missing a gold ribbon. There were 8 chairs, she said. Margaret did not turn. You are mistaken. I counted them. Children miscount. The words came gently, almost kindly, especially when they are distracted. Grace slipped her notebook from the pocket of her dress and opened to a page filled with small circles. She had drawn the tables while waiting for Elena to finish. Table 14 had 8 circles around it. Beside the drawing, Grace had written 8 stars because Elena had promised her 1 cookie for every napkin she folded correctly. Margaret's eyes moved to the notebook and then away. Vittorio studied the page. Bring the 9th chair from storage. Vittorio, Isabella said. This is becoming absurd. Then it will be easy to disprove. A guard returned with a banquet chair bearing the same gold ribbon as the others. Margaret relaxed slightly. There. 9 chairs. Grace stepped closer. The ribbon was tied correctly, but the paper inventory tag beneath the seat was fresh and white, while the tags from the wedding had yellow edges from storage dust. Vittorio crouched, ran 1 finger across the label, and looked at the date printed in the corner. The chair had been entered into the event inventory the morning after the wedding. Margaret drew a quiet breath, then smiled as if the discrepancy were administrative. A replacement after damage, she said. Perfectly routine. Vittorio stood. Then there will be a damage report. Margaret's smile held. Adrian's did not. He shifted his camera bag behind his leg. Grace saw the movement and remembered the flash of red tape beneath the zipper. Vittorio followed her gaze. Open the bag, he said. Adrian spread his hands. There is nothing in there but equipment. Then open it. The photographer unzipped the main compartment and placed 2 lenses, a charger, and 1 black memory card on the table. Grace stared at it. No red tape. No crescenza ped scratch. Adrian gave her a thin smile. Perhaps that settles at least one child's memory. Grace looked at the seam along the bottom of the bag. It was black like the rest, but one section of thread was newer, tighter, almost blue under the projector light. She raised 1 finger and pointed. That part was sewn today. Adrian's hand moved too quickly, covering the seam before anyone else could touch it. Adrian's palm stayed over the seam, his fingers spread too wide to look casual. Vittorio did not raise his voice. Move your hand. The photographer glanced toward Isabella, then Margaret, as if one of them might turn the order into a misunderstanding. Neither spoke. Slowly, he lifted his hand. Vittorio nodded to the security chief. Photograph the bag before you touch it. Every side. Then open the seam under video. The chief placed the bag on the table, called in counsel, and started a continuous recording on a secured device. Grace stood close to Elena, clutching her silver camera while a guard cut 3 stitches with a narrow evidence knife. The false lining opened less than an inch. Inside was a memory card wrapped in tissue and marked with a strip of red tape. A crescent-shaped scratch crossed one corner. Grace pointed before anyone could remove it. That's the one. Adrian's face had gone pale beneath the projector light. It is a backup card. I forgot it was there. You forgot someone sewed it into your bag? Vittorio asked. Adrian looked down. My assistant handles repairs. Name him. No answer came. Counsel slid the card into a clear evidence sleeve and wrote the time across the seal. Vittorio watched every movement. No one copies it on a networked machine. Use an isolated system. Make 2 forensic images. Hash both. Keep the original sealed. The instructions came without heat, which made the room colder. Margaret folded her hands. Even if the card contains unused footage, that does not prove misconduct. Photographers separate raw material all the time. Then the raw material will defend you, Vittorio said. A technician arrived with a clean laptop and portable reader. The first scan showed the card had been reformatted less than an hour earlier, during the screening. Most files appeared empty. Adrian seized on it. There. Corrupted media. That happens. Grace shook her head. It wasn't empty when he closed the bag. Isabella's fingers touched her pearls. Grace, you could not see what was stored on a card. No, Grace looked at Adrian. But he checked it after the man gave him the envelope. He smiled at the little screen. Vittorio remained silent longer than anyone expected. He remembered Adrian at funerals, baptisms, private dinners, always near enough to preserve the family's image and trusted enough to decide what the family would never see. Then the technician leaned closer to the display. The format removed the directory, not everything. There are thumbnails, audio waveforms, and temporary video fragments. He restored a file lasting 7 seconds. The image trembled as though the camera had been lowered too quickly. Isabella stood beside the bridal suite door. Luca faced her from the restricted corridor. No weapon pressed against her. No hand forced the lock. She looked directly at him, opened the door and said, "You get 5 minutes." No one breathed. Vittorio stared at Isabella. She did not deny the voice. She only whispered, "You don't understand what he threatened." The clip froze on Luca stepping inside. At the edge of the frame, a silver serving tray reflected the glow of his phone. Grace lifted her camera. "I took that tray from the other side." Her photograph showed the same curved reflection, clearer than the video. The phone screen displayed a map, its lettering reversed in the metal. The technician flipped the image. Dock 12 East appeared across the glass. Vittorio's silver watch ticked once into the silence. Dock 12 was where 3 family leaders were scheduled to meet the next morning. The technician isolated the damaged audio beneath the clip. Static broke around a woman's voice, but 4 words survived intact. "Use the maid's card." Vittorio did not speak. His eyes moved from Elena's cracked badge to Margaret's white gloves, then finally to Isabella's hand resting on the pearls he had fastened around her neck before the ceremony. When he did move, it was only to slide his phone across the table to counsel. "Preserve everything," he said. Then he looked at the woman he had intended to trust with his name. "And pull every payment made by Isabella's charity account in the last 90 days. The phone Vittorio had pushed toward counsel vibrated once against the table, then again. No one reached for it until the attorney turned the screen away from Isabella and opened the first account report. 3 payments had left the Moretti Hope Foundation within 6 weeks. Each had been labeled event accessibility equipment. The largest had gone to a company registered above a vacant storefront in Newark. The invoice beneath it listed a handheld credential duplicator, 6 blank proximity cards, and overnight delivery to Margaret Vale's office. Margaret's expression did not change. "The foundation purchased equipment for volunteer check-in," she said. "That description is broad enough to sound suspicious when removed from context." Vittorio looked at the serial number on the invoice. Compare it to the scanner in Grace's photograph. The security chief enlarged the reflection from the warming oven. The final 6 digits matched. Isabella drew a slow breath. "I approved hundreds of charitable expenses. Margaret handled vendors." Margaret turned toward her with a look so brief it might have been mistaken for surprise. "You personally authorized that one." Vittorio raised one finger and both women stopped. "Separate rooms," he said. "No phones." No conversation between them. His voice remained even. Guards escorted Margaret toward the private study and Isabella toward the library. Adrian was taken to a third room with counsel present. Grace watched the doors close. "Are they going to blame my mom again?" she asked. Vittorio looked at Elena's cracked badge, still hanging from the blue cord. "Not without going through me." It was not comfort. It was a decision. Elena lowered her eyes for a moment, as though she did not yet know whether she was allowed to believe him. Vittorio ordered copies of every access report, purchase authorization, security complaint, and staffing memo from the month before the wedding. He had the evidence room sealed and assigned 2 guards from different teams so no one person controlled the chain. Grace and Elena were moved to a small breakfast room away from the others. Rain began tapping softly against the tall windows. A refrigerator hummed behind the service wall, and somewhere in the kitchen a spoon touched the side of a glass with a thin, ordinary sound. Vittorio entered carrying 2 cups of hot chocolate and set them down without ceremony. Grace looked at hers but did not touch it. "I don't want anything," she said. "Not money. Not a new camera." Her fingers rested on the old silver one. "I just want them to stop saying Mom did it." Vittorio sat across from her. "Then tell me only what you know." Grace nodded. "Mom wrote something before the wedding." Elena looked up sharply. Grace opened her small notebook and removed a sheet folded into quarters. She had kept it because Elena had used the back to help her practice multiplication. On the front was a handwritten security. Warning. Elena had reported that employee badges could be copied if held near a portable reader. At the bottom, in blue ink, was a receiving stamp from Margaret's office dated 14 days before the wedding. "She gave it back," Grace said. "She told Mom not to act like an expert."
Elena's face tictened.
The official report said the system passed inspection. Counsel returned with a digital copy. The paragraph about badge cloning had been removed. In its place was a line stating that Elena had repeatedly misplaced her credentials and required monitoring. Vittorio read the sentence twice. "Did you ever lose your badge?" "Never." "Were you warned about it?" "No." He compared the metadata. Margaret had edited the file 43 minutes after Elena's report was received. Another vibration sounded from the phone. The technician had identified the damaged female voice from the recovered footage. It matched Margaret's recorded staff training sessions, including the exact phrase, "No one will look twice." Vittorio closed his eyes for 1 second. When he opened them, Isabella was brought back alone. She saw Elena's report on the table and touched her pearls. "Luca threatened me," she said. "He had photographs from years ago. I opened the door because I wanted him gone." "And the scanner?" Vittorio asked. "Margaret arranged it. The money came from your foundation. She told me it was equipment." Grace looked at Isabella's hand. "You touch your necklace when you lie." The room went still. Isabella lowered her fingers. Under separate questioning, Margaret was told Isabella had already confessed. She denied everything for less than 3 minutes, then admitted cloning Elena's badge and altering the report. "It was practical," she said. "If the entry was discovered, suspicion needed somewhere harmless to land." Vittorio stared through the glass toward Elena, who sat with Grace beneath the yellow kitchen light. He had spent years believing danger would come from men who carried guns, rivals who raised their voices, enemies who announced themselves. All that time, a woman in a black uniform had warned his house exactly where it was vulnerable, and the people he trusted had turned her warning into evidence against her. He had not merely failed to see Elena. He had allowed his entire system to decide that her life was the safest one to sacrifice. Vittorio remained at the glass long enough to watch Elena fold Grace's security report back along its original creases. He did not apologize. An apology without protection would only ask the injured person to make him feel forgiven. Instead, he turned to counsel. "Move the real Doc 12 meeting. Different site, different hour. Tell no one outside this room." By midnight, a false schedule had been prepared with 3 deliberate errors. A container number that did not exist, an arrival time 23 minutes late, and an entrance route used only by Margaret during private events. Vittorio printed a single copy and placed it face down inside a cream envelope. The room had grown colder. Rain traced narrow lines down the windows, and the old clock above the fireplace counted each second with a dry mechanical click. Isabella believes Luca came only for leverage, Vittorio said. Margaret believes Isabella has confessed. Adrian believes the deleted footage protects him. Let each of them keep believing something different. His consigliera studied the false route. And the child? Grace is not part of the operation. Vittorio's answer came immediately. She stays with her mother under protection. In the breakfast room, Grace sat with her knees tucked beneath the chair while Elena repaired the loose clasp on her blue star bracelet. Vittorio entered carrying the sealed envelope but did not show her the contents. I need one memory, he said. Nothing more. Grace looked up. About Margaret? About the photograph. Her hands. Grace pictured the warming oven, the silver reflection, and the scanner held near her mother's copied badge. She wore white gloves. All day. Almost. Grace touched the star bead while she searched the picture in her mind. At the flowers, too. One glove had a string hanging from the thumb, caught on the ribbon. Vittorio asked no second question. He returned to the screening room and enlarged Grace's original photograph. The scanner was partly hidden, but the glove around it showed a loose thread at the right thumb. Counsel photographed the detail and added it to the evidence log. Then Vittorio began the test. Isabella was told he had accepted her claim of blackmail and intended to protect the family from scandal. Margaret was told the Doc 12 meeting would proceed because canceling it might alarm rival families. Adrian was told the recovered files were too damaged to establish anything beyond doubt. The false schedule remained inside Vittorio's study, visible only beneath the glass top of his desk. Margaret was brought in alone. I need the wedding vendor files, Vittorio said. They are stored in the cabinet behind you. She crossed the room, past the desk, and opened the cabinet. Her hand paused on the brass handle. The tiny red light on a concealed camera blinked once. She did not look directly at the envelope. She only shifted her body so its reflection appeared in the polished cabinet door. Anything else? She asked. No, Vittorio's voice stayed quiet. That will be all. Margaret left without touching the desk. For 6 minutes, nothing happened. Then the camera outside the florist's storage room recorded her entering with an empty white box. Grace and Elena were already behind a locked door on another floor, watched by 2 guards from separate teams. Vittorio viewed the feed beside counsel. Margaret removed her gloves, revealing a faint indentation where the loose thread had pressed into her thumb. From beneath a layer of wedding ribbons, she lifted a small black phone no larger than her palm. Its screen lit the underside of her face. She photographed the false schedule's reflection from the cabinet glass and typed the non-existent container number. The message uploaded slowly. 10%. 34. 68. Margaret stood motionless while the phone transmitted, one bare hand resting on the lid of the flower box. At 92%, someone knocked in the hallway. Her fingers stopped above the screen. The camera light blinked again. She turned toward the door, listening. No second knock came. The upload completed. A reply arrived almost immediately. Confirm Vittorio inside before Luca moves. Margaret deleted the message, replaced the phone beneath the ribbons, and walked out carrying the same empty box. Vittorio did not order her detained. Track the number, he said. Let the false route travel. Near dawn, Grace woke when the guarded breakfast room door opened. Vittorio stood there, still in his charcoal suit, the silver watch bright against his cuff. He placed a printed photograph on the table, not of a criminal, not of a weapon, but of Margaret's white-gloved hand holding the secret phone. The loose thread at the thumb was clearly visible. Grace looked from the picture to Vittorio. You believed me? I believed what you remembered. In the hallway behind him, Margaret had stopped walking. She could see the photograph between them, and for the first time her polite expression failed completely. Then Vittorio's phone vibrated. The tracker on the false container number had activated at Dock 12 East. The tracker pulsed once on Vittorio's screen, a red point moving along the eastern edge of Dock 12. He watched it for 3 seconds, then locked the phone and turned to his consigliera. Take him alive. Preserve every device before anyone touches it. No raised voice. No visible anger. Only a colder kind of certainty. By sunrise, Luca Ferraro was in custody inside a secured port office with a listening device, a printed map of the false route, and the black phone that had received Margaret's message. Vittorio did not go to the dock. He returned everyone to the private screening room where the lie had first been defended. Isabella sat beneath the wedding portrait in the same pearl necklace. Margaret stood near the projector, her hands bare now. Adrian remained beside counsel, pale and silent. Elena was offered a chair at the front rather than a place against the wall. Grace sat beside her, the old silver camera resting in her lap. Vittorio stood behind the last row. "Play it," he said. The wedding music did not begin. A black screen appeared with a single white timestamp. 6:07 p.m. Luca entered the restricted corridor. At 6:09, Elena's cloned badge opened the door, while kitchen footage showed Elena lifting a tray 30 yards away. At 6:10, the master. Card registered beside it. At 6:11, Grace's photograph captured Margaret's gloved hand holding the scanner, Adrian receiving the cream envelope, and the 3 clocks agreeing. At 6:13, the guest list file was edited to add Leonard Crane. At 6:16, Isabella opened the bridal suite door and gave Luca 5 minutes. At 6:18, the silver tray reflected Dock 12 East from Luca's phone. No one interrupted. The next image showed the red tape memory card hidden inside Adrian's bag, followed by the forensic record proving it had been erased during the first screening. Then came the invoice for the card duplicator, paid through Isabella's charity account and delivered to Margaret's office. Elena's original report appeared beside the altered version that accused her of mishandling her badge. Margaret looked away first. "The report was administrative," she said. "The system required a plausible explanation if irregular access appeared." Vittorio's face did not change. "A plausible explanation," he repeated. Grace lifted her notebook. "She means Mom." Margaret's eyes moved toward her. "You do not understand organizational liability." Grace opened the folded report and placed it on the table. "I understand she warned you before the wedding." The room went silent again. Counsel played the hidden camera footage from Vittorio's study. Margaret photographed the false schedule. Her secret phone displayed the non-existent container number. Her voice transmitted it to Luca. Then the Dock 12 arrest footage appeared. Luca stepping from a black sedan, checking the fake route, and placing a listening device beneath the empty conference table. The serial number on the device matched a purchase made through his shell company. Isabella went pale. "He told me he only wanted the old photographs destroyed." Counsel displayed Luca's phone backup. Her messages filled the screen. She had chosen the wedding date because all 3 family leaders would be in the city. She had sent the port schedule weeks before Luca threatened to expose her. She had written, "Once he has the route, I am free." Vittorio did not speak. His eyes remained on those words while the silver watch on his wrist ticked into the silence. He had trusted Isabella with his home, Margaret with his security, Adrian with his family's memories. Elena had warned them, and he had never known her report existed. Grace had shown him the truth, and the first instinct of every powerful adult in the room had been to make the child smaller. For several seconds, Vittorio could not speak at all. Then he removed his family signet ring and set it beside Elena's cracked badge. The sound was barely louder than the projector fan. "You chose her name," he said to Margaret, "because you believed poverty had no witnesses." He turned to Isabella. "Fear explains why you opened the door. It does not excuse who you pushed through it." Adrian lowered his head. Margaret's composure finally broke at the edges. Isabella touched her pearls, then stopped when she saw Grace watching. Vittorio placed Luca's phone, the red tape card, Elena's original report, and Grace's silver camera in one straight line across the table. He looked at counsel. "Seal the room. Preserve the chain. Send the complete file to independent authorities." Then, without looking away from the people who had built the lie beneath his roof, he added, "No private settlement. No erased record. No one leaves protected by my name." No one left protected by Vittorio's name. By noon, independent counsel had transferred the sealed evidence to federal investigators, the Port Authority, and the Financial Crimes Unit. The original red tape memory card remained inside a tamper-evident sleeve, logged beside Luca's phone. The cloned badge data, the card duplicator invoice, and Elena's unaltered security report. Grace's silver camera was photographed, copied under supervision, and returned to her only after every original file had been preserved. Luca Ferraro was charged in connection with unlawful access, attempted theft of protected commercial information, electronic surveillance, and conspiracy. Margaret Vale was removed from every DeLuca property before sunset. Her access credentials were revoked, her office was sealed, and investigators opened a case into the altered records. Cloned employee badge and route leak. Adrian Cole lost his contracts with the family and several partner businesses after admitting he had accepted payment to erase footage. His statement was recorded formally, not traded for silence. Isabella's authority over the Moretti Hope Foundation was suspended by its board. The charity accounts were frozen for review, and Vittorio's attorneys began the legal process to end the marriage before it could be completed on paper. He refused the private agreement her lawyers offered. There would be no payment in exchange for sealed testimony, no statement calling the incident a misunderstanding, and no version of the wedding film in which Luca simply disappeared. 3 days later, the mansion staff gathered in the same screening room. Elena stood near the wall out of habit until Vittorio pulled a chair into the front row. "Please sit, Ms. Miller," he said. He did not call her Elena as though familiarity could erase what had happened. On the screen appeared her original report, including the warning that portable readers could copy employee credentials. Beside it was the altered version that had falsely described her as careless. Vittorio faced the staff. Elena Miller identified the security vulnerability 14 days before the wedding. Her report was suppressed, her record was falsified, and her name was used to conceal a crime committed under my roof. He paused. Elena's hands rested still in her lap. "I failed to build a system that protected the person who told the truth. That failure was mine." The corrected report was entered into her personnel file. The false warning was deleted with an audit record showing why. Elena was offered a salaried position as compliance and staff safety coordinator, reporting directly to independent counsel rather than household management. The role included health insurance, paid leave, formal training, and authority to halt any event when access procedures were violated. She read every page before signing. No one hurried her. Vittorio also established a protected reporting system with automatic timestamps, outside legal review, anti-retaliation rules, and dual authentication for every restricted door. No manager could edit or erase a complaint alone. Grace's name was entered into the evidence record as the person who supplied the original photographs, not the maid's daughter, Grace Miller. When the meeting ended, Vittorio placed Elena's cracked badge on the table beside a new one bearing her title. "The old card belongs in the record," he said. "The new one belongs to you." Elena looked at him carefully. "And if I report something you do not want to hear, then the system should make it impossible for me to pretend I didn't hear it." Grace held her repaired camera against her blue star bracelet. The technician had replaced the battery cover but left the crescent scratch untouched. "Can Mom open the main door now?" she asked. Vittorio looked toward the entrance staff had always been expected to avoid. Yes. That evening, Elena used her new badge at the front entrance. The lock turned green. No guard redirected her toward the service hall. Grace stepped through beside her, then stopped and raised the silver camera. Vittorio stood several feet away beneath the chandelier, his charcoal suit suddenly too formal for the quiet moment. Grace took one photograph. "What did you see?" he asked. She lowered the camera. "A door that finally opened for the right person." Vittorio said nothing, because the smallest voice in his house had already said enough, and this time everyone had listened. "Who left my son in the trash?" Rocco Moretti's voice cut through the dining room like a blade. The Mafia boss stood frozen as Sophia Bellini, the maid's 8-year-old daughter, held a crying newborn against her chest and pointed toward the hospital bracelet on his tiny wrist. Valentina smiled calmly and said the child was not what Sophia claimed. But the little girl whispered, "Sir, I found him there by the kitchen. 3 hours earlier." The Moretti mansion had been silent in the way only powerful houses could be silent. Every marble floor was polished. Every guard stood exactly where he was ordered. Every door had a camera watching it. Rocco Moretti had built his life around control. At 48, he trusted systems more than people because systems could be measured and people could betray you. That night, he sat at the long dining table with his consigliere and lawyers, reviewing documents connected to the future of the Moretti family. The black suit on his shoulders looked like armor. The gold watch from his father rested against his wrist. Everything around him represented power, until a small voice from the back hallway broke through the room. "Sir." Rocco looked up. Sophia Bellini stood at the entrance, barefoot on the cold marble floor. Her old sweater was slightly wet from the rain outside, and her hands were trembling. But she was not crying. That was what made him notice her. Behind her, Elena Bellini, her mother, hurried forward with fear in her eyes. "Sophia, what happened?" Sophia did not answer immediately. She looked down at the bundle in her arms. A newborn baby, wrapped in an expensive cream-colored blanket that did not belong near the kitchen trash area. "I heard something," Sophia finally said, "near the back kitchen door." The room became still. Valentina Moretti entered a moment later, wearing an elegant silk robe, her expression perfectly controlled. She looked like a woman walking into a misunderstanding, not a crisis. "Rocco," she said softly, "this is probably just confusion. She is a child. She may have found someone else's baby outside." Sophia looked at her, then back at Rocco. "No, sir." Her voice was quiet but steady. "The baby was inside your house." Rocco slowly stood. The room changed when he moved. Guards stopped talking. Lawyers stopped writing. Even the air seemed heavier. He walked toward Sophia, expecting to see fear in her face. Instead, he saw something else. Certainty. He looked at the baby first. Then he noticed the small hospital bracelet around the newborn's wrist. It was dirty from the rain, but the symbol printed on it was clear. St. Helena Private Hospital. The same hospital where his first son had been born. Rocco's expression did not change, but his hand stopped halfway as he reached toward the bracelet. "Where exactly did you find him?" he asked. Sophia pointed toward the back of the mansion. "Behind the kitchen, inside the trash area." Valentina stepped closer immediately. "Rocco, please, do not let a frightened child create a story that damages this family." Her words sounded reasonable, almost kind, but Sophia noticed something no one else did. Valentina had not looked at the baby. She had looked only at the bracelet. "Why are you looking at that?" Sophia asked softly. For the first time, Valentina's perfect expression broke for less than a second. Just enough for Rocco to see it. Tiny movement. A moment of fear. Rocco said nothing. He had spent decades recognizing weakness in enemies. He knew that fear did not appear without a reason. Sophia carefully adjusted the blanket around the baby. She was not trying to prove anything. She was only trying to keep him warm. "I think someone wanted him gone," she whispered. The room fell silent again. Rocco looked toward the kitchen hallway, toward the place where no one should have been able to hide anything inside his home. Then his eyes returned to the bracelet. A small piece of plastic. A forgotten detail. A thing everyone else had ignored. But when Rocco turned it over, he saw a number engraved on the back that made his face lose its color. The number on the bracelet was not supposed to be there. Rocco Moretti stared at the tiny engraving beneath the hospital symbol. His face unreadable, but his silence louder than anger. Sophia Bellini stood nearby holding the newborn carefully, watching every adult in the room react. Differently. Elena looked frightened. The lawyers looked confused. The guards looked away. But Valentina Moretti did something much smaller. She took one step backward. Rocco noticed. He noticed everything. "Give me the bracelet," he said quietly. Sophia hesitated for only a second before carefully extending the baby's wrist toward him. She was not protecting the object. She was protecting the child. Rocco took a closer look. The bracelet was old, slightly stained, and stretched from being worn too long. It carried the hospital mark from St. Helena Private Hospital and a faded identification number. To most people in the room, it looked like a forgotten piece of plastic. To Rocco, it looked like a question someone had tried to throw away. "This could belong to any newborn," Valentina said calmly. Her voice was gentle, almost comforting. "You know how hospitals work. Mistakes happen. Someone may have left this here by accident." Rocco lifted his eyes toward her. "You knew the hospital." The room became quiet. Valentina smiled faintly. "Of course I know the hospital. Our family has used St. Helena for years." A reasonable answer. A normal answer. But Rocco did not respond. He simply placed the bracelet on the table beside the legal documents he had been reviewing minutes earlier. Sophia watched him carefully. She could tell something had changed. He was not believing her yet, but he was no longer ignoring her. "Sophia," Rocco said, turning toward her. "Tell me exactly what happened. Not what you think happened. Only what you saw." The little girl nodded. She looked down at the baby first, making sure he was still warm. Then she spoke. "I was taking the trash outside because my mother asked me to help before we went home." She paused. "I heard a sound behind the kitchen door." "A sound?" Rocco asked. "A cry," Sophia said. "But not a loud cry, like he was tired." No one interrupted. "I thought maybe it was an animal at first. Then I heard it again." She tightened her small fingers around the edge of her sweater. "I opened the bag because I thought someone might be hurt." Elena closed her eyes briefly. She had taught Sophia to help people, but she had never wanted her daughter to discover something like this. Valentina stepped forward. "Rocco, this is exactly why we need to be careful. Children fill gaps in stories. They see something frightening and their minds create explanations." Her words were polite, professional, but Sophia looked at her and quietly said, "I didn't create the blanket." Everyone looked down. The baby was wrapped in the same expensive cream-colored blanket. Rocco picked it up. The fabric was soft. Too soft for a trash area. Too expensive for something someone would casually throw away. "Where did you find this?" he asked. "Under him," Sophia answered. "It was folded around him." Rocco looked toward the kitchen entrance. The question was no longer whether Sophia was telling the truth. The question was why someone had placed a newborn inside his home and expected nobody to notice. He turned to his head of security. "Show me the kitchen cameras." The guard immediately reached for his radio. "Yes, sir." A few minutes later, the security footage appeared on the large screen in the private office. The hallway appeared. The kitchen appeared. Staff moved through the frame. Then the image froze. "There," the guard said. "Camera malfunction." Rocco looked at the timestamp. The footage stopped at 2:13 a.m. and returned at 2:24 a.m., 11 minutes missing. "A malfunction?" Rocco asked. The guard swallowed. "That's what the system shows, sir." Rocco did not answer. Sophia stood quietly near the doorway, holding her small notebook against her chest. Rocco noticed it. "What's that?" he asked. She opened it carefully. Inside were small notes written in a child's handwriting. Times, sounds, things she noticed while working around the mansion. "I write things down when I don't want to forget," she said. Rocco looked at the page she opened. One sentence was written from that night. "Back kitchen door opened at 2:07. Someone smelled like roses." Rocco's eyes moved slowly from the notebook to Valentina's empty chair across the room. Because everyone in the Moretti mansion knew one thing about Valentina Moretti. She always wore the same rose perfume. The rose perfume was still in the room, but Valentina Moretti was not. Rocco. Moretti stood silently in his private office, staring at the frozen security footage on the screen. 11 missing minutes. A newborn hidden behind the kitchen. A bracelet that should not exist. And now a child's notebook containing a detail no one else had noticed. Sophia Bellini stood beside the doorway, holding her small notebook with both hands, unaware that a few simple words written in pencil had just changed the way Rocco looked at his own home. Rocco did not accuse anyone. Not yet. He had survived decades in a world where accusations without proof got people killed and innocent people destroyed. He believed in evidence. Evidence did not panic. Evidence did not lie. "Show me the access log," he told his security chief. The guard immediately pulled up the system records. The screen displayed every door opened inside the mansion that night. The kitchen entrance, the staff hallway, the storage corridor. Rocco watched the timestamps carefully. 2:07 a.m. The back kitchen door opened. 2:13 a.m. The camera stopped. 2:24 a.m. The camera returned. But something bothered him. He leaned closer. "Go back." The guard replayed the log. Rocco pointed at the screen. "Who opened the door at 2:07? The guard checked the identification code. His face changed slightly. "It was a staff access card, sir." "Whose?" A pause. "Elena Bellini's." The room became colder. Sophia looked up immediately. "No." Her voice was small, but certain. Everyone turned toward her. "My mother didn't do that." Elena stepped forward quickly, fear appearing on her face. "Sophia, honey." But Sophia shook her head. "She was with me." Rocco looked at the girl. "You are sure?" Sophia nodded. "She was helping me find my sweater because it was raining. She was in our room when the door opened." The guard looked uncomfortable. "The system says otherwise." Sophia stepped closer to the screen but stopped before reaching it. She did not touch anything. She only pointed. "That time is wrong." Rocco studied her. "Why?" Sophia looked at the numbers carefully. "Because the kitchen clock was broken yesterday. It was 5 minutes slow." Nobody spoke. Rocco turned toward the security footage again. He checked the kitchen. Camera timestamp against another camera in the hallway. There was a difference. 5 minutes. Sophia had not guessed. She had remembered. The guard swallowed. The access log may have been adjusted. For the first time, Rocco looked directly at Sophia with something different in his eyes. Not trust. Not yet. But respect. "How did you notice that?" he asked. Sophia shrugged slightly. "I help my mom in the kitchen sometimes. I know which clocks are wrong." It was such a simple answer that it made the room quieter. The people who lived in the mansion had ignored a broken clock. A child who cleaned after them had remembered it. Rocco looked back at the access record. If the time was changed, then someone wanted the door opening to point toward Elena. Someone wanted the evidence to blame the person with the least power. Valentina entered the office moments later, perfectly composed. "Is everything all right?" she asked. Her eyes moved quickly around the room. The screen, the notebook, the bracelet on the desk. Rocco noticed. "We are reviewing security information." Valentina smiled softly. "Of course. I only hope we don't turn a frightened child into the center of a family scandal." Sophia lowered her eyes. She was used to adults talking about her as if she was not standing there. But this time, Rocco noticed the way her fingers tightened around her notebook. "She is not the problem," he said quietly. Valentina's smile faded for half a second. "I never said she was." Rocco looked at her. "No. You just suggested it." Valentina changed the subject immediately and asked about the baby. She asked whether the doctor had confirmed anything. Rocco noticed the question. Not concern. Not fear. Information. Before anyone could answer, Sophia opened her notebook again. "Sir," she said softly. "There was something else." Rocco turned toward her. "What?" Sophia pointed to another line she had written. "The person who left the baby wasn't wearing kitchen shoes." Rocco looked at the page. A child's handwriting described something adults had ignored. A small detail. A strange sound. Pair of clean shoes near a dirty place. Then Sophia added one more sentence she had written after finding. "The baby. The person who carried him smelled like roses." Rocco slowly looked toward Valentina. Because for the first time, the evidence was not pointing toward what happened. It was pointing toward who had been close enough to make it happen. "You just answered a question nobody asked." Rocco Moretti's words remained in the room long after he said them. Valentina Moretti stood near the office doorway, her expression calm again, her hands folded neatly in front of her. A person who did not know her would have seen elegance, control, grace, but Rocco had spent his entire life studying people who knew how to hide things, and he had just seen the smallest crack. Now, he needed to know if it was a crack in the wall or the beginning of something much larger. "Everyone leaves the room," Rocco said quietly. The guards, lawyers, and staff members moved immediately. Sophia stayed near the door with Elena, holding her little notebook close to her chest. Rocco noticed that she did not ask to stay. She understood something many adults in his world did not. Sometimes being quiet was not weakness. Sometimes it was survival. "Sophia," Rocco said, "you can go with your mother." Sophia nodded, but before leaving, she looked at the baby sleeping in the doctor's arms. "Can someone make sure he stays warm?" she asked. It was not a demand. It was not an accusation. It was simply the only thing she cared about. After she left, Rocco turned back to the room. He looked at the bracelet, the blanket, the security report. "I want every person who entered this kitchen area last night questioned separately," he ordered. His consigliere, Thomas Russo, nodded. "Of course, but we should be careful, Rocco. Right now we have a strange child, a missing camera segment, and an emotional assumption. We do not have proof." Rocco looked at him. "I know." That answer surprised everyone. He was not chasing a feeling. He was chasing what did not fit. The next morning, the Moretti mansion looked exactly the same from the outside. The gardens were trimmed. The staff moved quietly. The marble floors reflected the sunlight. But inside, everyone felt the pressure. Sophia stood in the service corridor beside her mother while two security officers reviewed the staff statements. She was not in the grand rooms where decisions were made. She was back where people like her were expected to disappear. One of the officers looked at the report. "The access card used at 2:07 a.m. belongs to Elena Bellini." Elena's face went pale. "That's impossible." The officer spoke politely. "Mrs. Bellini, we are not accusing you. We are simply following the data." It sounded reasonable. That was what made it difficult. The truth could be buried under calm voices and official words. Sophia stepped forward. "My mom didn't open that door." The officer looked down at her. Not cruelly, almost kindly. "Sophia, adults are handling this." The words were gentle, but they carried the same message she had heard many times before. Stay small. Stay quiet. Rocco, who had been standing at the end of the corridor without anyone noticing, heard every word. "Let her speak," he said. Everyone turned. Sophia looked at him. "Thank you, sir." Rocco nodded once. "Tell me what you know." Sophia looked at the access report. "The card is my mom's. But she wasn't there." She pointed toward the printed time. The kitchen clock was 5 minutes slow. The person who changed the time knew that. Thomas looked at the report again. "That is a child's observation." Sophia's fingers tightened around her notebook. "Yes, sir. But it is still true." The corridor became silent. Rocco did not defend her because she was a child. He defended the question because the question was valid. He turned to security. "Pull every access point from the back kitchen." 10 minutes later, another screen appeared. The security team showed the door records. There was the access card. There was the time. There was the missing footage. But then Rocco noticed something else. "Zoom in." The technician enlarged the image near the kitchen entrance. A second badge appeared briefly in the reflection of the glass door. Not enough to identify the person, but enough to prove someone else was there. The room shifted. The report blaming Elena was no longer complete. Someone had been standing beside the door. Valentina arrived moments later, perfectly dressed, carrying a cup of coffee as if she had walked into a normal morning. "I heard there was confusion among the staff," she said softly. "I hope we are not creating unnecessary suspicion." Rocco watched her place the cup down. "You came quickly," she smiled. "I live here." "Yes," Rocco replied. You do. Valentina looked toward the screen. For a fraction of a second, her eyes moved toward the reflection. Then she looked away. A reflection proves nothing. Rocco said nothing. He did not need to, because when Valentina picked up her coffee again, a tiny detail caught his attention. Her right hand had a faint red mark around the wrist, the same shape as the security badge strap shown in the reflection. The red mark around Valentina Moretti's wrist disappeared beneath her sleeve before anyone else noticed. But Rocco Moretti noticed. He had spent his life watching people hide weapons, secrets, and fear. A small movement was often louder than a confession. Still, he did not accuse her. Not yet. A suspicion was not a weapon. It was only a direction. In his world, direction meant nothing without proof. Rocco returned to his private study with the security file, the hospital bracelet, and Sophia Bellini's notebook placed carefully on the table. He looked at each item separately, like pieces from different puzzles. Then he looked at them together. The bracelet, the missing footage, the access record, the reflection in the glass. Too many small things were pointing toward the same night. But small things could still be wrong. I want everything preserved, Rocco told Thomas Russo, his consigliere. No edits. No copies from personal devices. Create a complete chain of custody. Thomas nodded. You think someone inside the house altered evidence? Rocco looked at the security report. I think someone inside this house believed they could. Meanwhile, Sophia sat with Elena in the small staff dining area near the kitchen. She was not allowed in the investigation room, and she did not ask to enter. She understood that adults with expensive suits often believed important things only happened in large rooms. But before she left the corridor, she had quietly taken something from the floor near the kitchen door. Not because she wanted attention, because she remembered seeing it there. A small torn piece of paper stuck beneath the edge of the cabinet. Sophia held it in her hand. Mom, she whispered. I think this was near the baby. Elena looked worried. Sophia, you should not touch things like that. Sophia lowered her eyes. I know, but nobody saw it. Elena looked at the paper carefully. It was not a note. It was part of a hospital document. Corner. Printed date. Partial patient number. Sophia had not understood what it meant. She only knew it looked important because someone had tried to hide it. Elena brought it immediately to Rocco. When Sophia entered his office, she stood near the door and held out the small piece of paper. I found this after the police tape was gone. Rocco did not take it immediately. Where exactly? Sophia pointed. Under the cabinet near the back kitchen door, where the baby was. Rocco put on gloves before touching it. Thomas noticed. You are treating a torn paper like evidence. Rocco looked at him. Because someone else treated it like trash. The room became quiet. The paper fragment was carefully scanned. The hospital logo appeared first. Then a date. Rocco stared at it. His expression changed slightly. The date was 3 days before the official record of the baby's disappearance. That is impossible, Thomas said quietly. The hospital bracelet had the same identification number, the same patient code. But the official report said the child had never left the hospital alive. Rocco leaned back slowly. He remembered a night years earlier. The phone call. The hospital hallway. The doctor who refused to meet his eyes. The explanation that came too quickly. The grief he was told to accept before he had time to ask questions. For years, he had believed he lost his son. Now he wondered if someone had convinced him to stop searching. Send this to the hospital records team, Rocco said. Independently, not through anyone connected to Moretti. Thomas nodded. And Valentina? Rocco remained silent. That silence answered more than words could. Sophia watched him carefully. She did not ask if he believed her. She did not need to. She had already seen the change. He was not looking at her like a child telling a strange story anymore. He was looking at the evidence. Hours later, the hospital response arrived. The original birth record existed, but one page had been replaced. A single page, a single signature, a single alteration that changed everything. Rocco stared at the copied document on his desk. The missing page had one name attached to the authorization request. Someone who had been allowed to access family records. Someone he had trusted enough to let inside his home. Rocco slowly placed the paper down and looked at the wedding photo on his desk. His eyes stopped on the woman standing beside him. Valentina. And for the first time in years, Rocco Moretti wondered if the person closest to him had been the person hiding the truth from him. The name on the altered hospital page was not a stranger's name. It was someone who had walked through the Moretti mansion every day. Someone who had sat at Rocco Moretti's table. Someone who knew exactly where his family was weakest. Rocco stared at the document without moving. The room around him was quiet except for the ticking of his father's old watch resting beside the papers. For years, he had believed losing his son was the cruelest thing that had ever happened to him. Now he was facing something colder. The possibility that someone had taken that pain and used it as a weapon. Find every record connected to this authorization, Rocco said to Thomas Russo. His voice was calm. Too calm. Every payment. Every employee involved. Every person who touched this file. Thomas studied him carefully. Rocco, if this leads where we think it leads. Rocco looked up. Then we prove it before anyone hears about it. He closed the folder. A man who acts on suspicion destroys things. A man who acts on proof changes them. The investigation moved quietly through the mansion. No announcements. No threats. No dramatic confrontation. Rocco knew something important. If Valentina was responsible, she was not careless. She had spent years building trust. People like that did not break under pressure. They broke when they believed they were still in control. The first discovery came from a financial review. A small payment. Not enough to attract attention. Not enough to appear suspicious. 3 separate transfers over 6 months to a private consulting company that no longer existed. The company had no office. No employees. Only one connection. A former legal assistant who had worked with Valentina before her marriage to Rocco. Then came another piece. A draft of the Moretti family inheritance plan. It was not the final document. It was a preparation document. A version created before Rocco's son was officially removed from the records. The purpose was clear. A different child would become the future heir. Rocco read the document twice. The words did not anger him. They hurt him, because this was not an attack on his business. It was an attack on a child who had never been able to defend himself. Later that night, rain covered the mansion windows. The kitchen lights were still on. Sophia sat at the small staff table with Elena, listening to the quiet sound of a washing machine running in the next room. For a moment it felt like an ordinary night. A mother and daughter. A warm drink. A tired house finally resting. Rocco stopped at the doorway but did not enter immediately. He watched Sophia carefully. She was not looking at expensive furniture or the rooms she was not allowed to enter. She was looking at the baby monitor beside Elena. You saved him, Rocco said softly. Sophia looked up. I just heard him. That answer stayed with him. She did not ask for money. She did not ask for a reward. She did not even ask to stay in the mansion. She only wanted the crying to stop. Are you afraid? Rocco asked. Sophia thought for a moment. Yes. She looked down. But I think being scared doesn't mean you should pretend something is okay. Rocco looked away for a second. In his world, people lied to survive. But this little girl had risked everything she had to tell the truth about someone nobody wanted to question. The next morning, Rocco quietly ordered a complete review of the family legal structure. Not because he wanted revenge. Because he needed to know how deep the damage went. The lawyers found something else hidden in the inheritance files. A clause prepared years earlier. A clause that would automatically remove any child whose identity could not be verified within 30 days. It had been designed to look like protection. But in reality, it created a way to erase someone permanently. Rocco placed the document down slowly. He remembered every meeting, every conversation, every time Valentina had suggested that the family needed stability. Every time he had accepted her words because he was tired of fighting after losing so much. Then he looked toward the hallway where Sophia had stood with a newborn in her arms. A child everyone else had ignored. A child who had seen what he had refused to see. And for the first time, Rocco Moretti understood the most dangerous mistake he had ever made. He had spent years protecting his empire from enemies outside the walls, while allowing the person inside those walls to decide who was allowed to belong. The document sat upside down on Rocco Moretti's desk for 3 hours. He had not touched it. He had not called anyone. He had not confronted anyone. That was what made everyone around him nervous. When Rocco Moretti was angry, people expected noise. When he was silent, people knew he was thinking. And now, he was thinking about every moment he had ignored a small warning because it came from someone the world considered insignificant. The next morning, Rocco walked into the mansion as if nothing had changed. Valentina greeted him in the hallway with a calm smile. "You look tired," she said softly. "Long night." Rocco adjusted the gold watch on his wrist. "Very long." She touched his arm. "I hope the investigation did not create unnecessary tension. Families break when people start searching for enemies everywhere." Rocco looked at her for a moment. "Sometimes they break because nobody searches at all." Valentina smiled, but her hand moved away from his arm. A small reaction. Almost invisible. Almost. Rocco noticed. He had already learned that the truth rarely announced itself. It slipped. It hesitated. It moved differently. Later that morning, Rocco met with Thomas Russo and his legal team in the private study. On the table were copies of the altered hospital record, the inheritance draft, the security reports, and Sophia Bellini's small notebook. "We need one more thing," Rocco said. Thomas looked at him. "A confession?" Rocco shook his head. "No. A mistake." His plan was simple. They would create a false piece of information and let it travel through the house. Not a lie that could hurt anyone. Just a test. A statement that the hospital had found an additional record connected to the baby's original file. A record that could identify who accessed the information years ago. The information would only be shared with a few people. People Rocco already suspected. Sophia was not involved in creating the plan. She stayed with Elena in the kitchen, coloring quietly while the adults worked. But before leaving, she handed Rocco her notebook. "I remembered something else." Rocco opened it. A small sentence was written beneath the note about the roses. "The lady with the rose smell always turns off the hallway light before she leaves." Rocco looked at the sentence. "Why did you write that?" Sophia shrugged. "Because she never forgets anything else." It was such a simple observation. But it mattered. People who were careful did not suddenly forget small habits unless they were distracted. That evening, the test began. A sealed envelope was placed on Rocco's desk. It had a broken wax mark, as if someone had opened it and closed it again. Inside was a fake report claiming the hospital had discovered a second authorization request. The report was meaningless. The reaction was what mattered. Security cameras watched the hallway. The legal team waited quietly. No one moved. Then, 20 minutes later, Valentina entered the study. She did not look around. She walked directly to the desk. That was the first mistake. She picked up the envelope. She did not ask what it was. She did not ask why it was there. She went straight to the page where the hospital information was printed. Rocco watched from the dark corner near the bookshelf. "Interesting," he said. Valentina froze. She turned slowly. "Rocco." His voice remained calm. "How did you know which page mattered?" She placed the paper down. Carefully. "I was curious." Curiosity usually starts at the beginning. The room became silent. Valentina recovered quickly. "You are testing me now?" Rocco stepped closer. "I am observing." Before she could answer, Thomas's phone vibrated on the table. Nobody touched it. The screen lit up with a new alert. A recovered security file had finished downloading. The file contained the hallway camera footage from the night the baby was found. Not the missing 11 minutes. The moments after. The moments someone thought were gone forever. Rocco looked at the screen. Then he looked at Valentina. Her expression remained controlled, but her eyes moved toward the phone for half a second too long. Sophia's small observation returned to him. The roses, the lights, the habits, the things people ignored because they seemed too small to matter. Rocco pressed play. The screen showed a figure walking toward the kitchen door. The face was not visible yet, but the person stopped beside the camera for 1 second and looked directly at it. As if they knew it was there. As if they were certain nobody would ever see this recording. Rocco leaned closer, because in the corner of the frame, something reflected under the hallway light. A ring. The same family ring Valentina wore every day. The room was silent when the ring appeared on the screen. Not because anyone was surprised, but because everyone understood what it meant. Rocco Moretti stared at the frozen image from the recovered security footage. A figure stood near the kitchen hallway, half hidden by the shadows. The face was unclear. The movement was brief, but the ring was unmistakable. The Moretti family ring. The same ring Valentina wore every day. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Rocco reached forward and paused the video again. He did not look angry. He looked tired, like a man who had finally found the answer to a question he had been afraid to ask. "Enhance the image," he said. The technician worked silently. The room filled with the sound of keys and the faint hum of the computer. Valentina stood near the doorway, perfectly composed. "Rocco," she said softly, "a reflection proves nothing. You know that." He looked at her. "Ido." A pause. "That's why I have more." The next morning, the Moretti family gathering was held in the private boardroom of the mansion. It was the same room where major decisions had been made for decades. Business agreements, family succession, future plans. A room where people with power decided what mattered and what disappeared. Valentina arrived confident. She believed the situation was still under control. She believed Rocco was investigating a mystery, not uncovering a betrayal. Around the table sat Thomas Russo, the legal team, senior family members, and the people responsible for protecting the Moretti name. Sophia Bellini stood near the back beside Elena. She was not there because she wanted attention. She was there because Rocco had asked her to be there. For the first time, she was not standing outside the room where decisions were made. Rocco placed the first piece of evidence on the table. The hospital bracelet. The same small object Sophia had found on the baby's wrist. "This was found on my son," Rocco said. Valentina remained calm. "A bracelet does not prove anything." Rocco nodded. "Correct." He placed down the second piece. The original hospital record. "This does." The room changed. The document showed the original birth record. Rocco Moretti listed as the father. The child's identity had been altered afterward. The official record had been replaced. Thomas explained each step carefully. The authorization request. The changed page. The false death report. The missing information. Nobody interrupted. Because the evidence was no longer a suspicion. It was a pattern. Valentina looked at the papers. Someone could have forged those records. Rocco placed down another file. They did. He opened the security report. The missing 11 minutes. The altered access log. The reflection from the hallway camera. Then came the final piece. The recovered audio file. Thomas pressed play. The room filled with a woman's voice. Calm. Controlled. Familiar. Once the inheritance transfer is complete, the child will no longer matter. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Valentina's face remained still, but the color slowly disappeared from it. The recording continued. Another voice answered. The voice of the former legal assistant connected to the hidden payments. The conversation confirmed what the documents had shown. The baby was not abandoned by accident. The child was removed because he stood between someone and power. Rocco closed his eyes for 1 second. Only 1 second. But everyone in the room saw it. The pain was not from losing control. It was from realizing he had handed trust to the wrong person. He remembered Sophia standing in the dining room with a newborn in her arms while everyone questioned her. He remembered Elena being treated like a suspect because she was the easiest person to blame. He remembered every time he had walked past people who had less power than him and assumed his protection reached them. It had not. Sophia looked at him quietly. She did not smile. She did not celebrate. She only held on to the truth she had carried from the beginning. "I told you," she said softly. "Someone left him there." Rocco looked at her. The room became completely still, because the smallest person there had been the only one who never changed her story. He walked toward the table and placed the hospital bracelet beside the legal documents. The tiny piece of plastic sat next to years of wealth, contracts, and power. And somehow it was the strongest evidence in the room. Valentina finally lost her calm. "Rocco, think carefully about what you are doing." He looked at her, expression cold and steady. "I am." He turned to Thomas. The next words were quiet, almost gentle. "Call my attorney." The words "call my attorney" changed the room forever. Not because anyone doubted Rocco Moretti had the power to destroy people. Everyone in that room knew he did. The difference was that this time he was not using power to protect his pride. He was using it to protect the truth. In the days that followed, the Moretti mansion became quieter than anyone remembered. Not peaceful. Not yet. Quiet in the way a place becomes when secrets are finally removed from the walls. Valentina Moretti was no longer treated as the future of the family. Her accounts connected to the inheritance process were frozen. Her access to company records was removed. The legal team that once worked for her now worked with investigators reviewing every altered document, every unauthorized payment, and every person involved in hiding Rocco's son. The former legal assistant who helped modify the hospital records signed a cooperation agreement after the evidence became impossible to deny. The former records showed exactly how the plan worked. The hospital page was replaced. The death report was falsified. The inheritance documents were prepared before the child was even removed from the records. It was not one mistake. It was a system built carefully over time. Valentina was not defeated by anger. She was defeated by the trail she left behind. At the Moretti family meeting, Rocco stood in the same room where Sophia Bellini had once been treated like someone who did not belong. The same table where powerful people had questioned her. The same chairs where decisions had been made without people like Elena having a voice. This time, Sophia and Elena sat at the table. Not behind it. Not near the door. At the table. Rocco placed the hospital bracelet inside a clear evidence case before everyone. The tiny piece of plastic that had been thrown away now had a permanent place in the official family records. "This does not belong in a drawer," Rocco said. "It belongs where everyone can see it." Thomas Russo read the final findings aloud. The documents were corrected. The child's identity was restored. The false records were removed. The investigation into fraud and document manipulation was officially opened. Then Rocco turned toward Elena. "I owe you an apology." The room became silent. Elena looked surprised. For years, she had worked inside a house where people with more money had more influence. She had learned to lower her voice. "You were treated as a suspect because you were the easiest person to blame," Rocco continued. "That happened under my roof. That happened because I built a system that watched doors but ignored people." Elena looked down, fighting the emotion in her face. Rocco did not hand her an envelope of money. He did not try to erase the past with a gift. Instead, he gave her something official. A new employment contract, fair wages, benefits, legal protections for household staff. A written policy that every employee in the Moretti organization had the right to report concerns without fear of losing their position. "No one who works here will disappear because they are considered less important," Rocco said. Sophia listened quietly. She was not interested in the numbers on the papers. She was interested in the fact that her mother was no longer standing alone. Later that evening, the mansion felt different. Not because it was bigger, because it finally felt lived in. Rain tapped softly against the kitchen window. The old washing machine hummed in the background. A small glass of milk sat on the table beside Sophia's new school supplies. Rocco walked in carrying a small box. Inside was a new coat for Sophia, simple and warm, with a small star stitched near the sleeve. "Your mother said your old one was too small," he said. Sophia touched the fabric carefully. Thank you, sir. Rocco smiled slightly. You can call me Rocco. She looked at him for a moment. Okay. A quiet moment passed. Then Sophia looked toward the evidence case displayed in the family room. The bracelet was still there. The first thing she had found. The thing everyone else ignored. Are you going to listen next time? She asked. Rocco looked at the bracelet, then at the little girl who had changed everything without ever asking for power. Yes, he said quietly. I am. Years of control had taught Rocco how to make people obey. But an 8-year-old girl had taught him something far harder. How to listen. And in the end, the truth did not win because it belonged to the strongest person in the room. It won because someone small enough to be ignored refused to let it disappear.